Robby, what's on your radar today?
Well, in a recent radar, I fretted that disinformation experts keep failing upward into ever greater positions of prominence, even when their underlying research comes under serious scrutiny. Last week, the New York Times commented on and contributed to the most compelling example of this phenomenon, the person of Nina Jankowicz, who has returned from exile to launch a new disinformation tracking organization called the American Sunlight Project. Jankowicz, viewers will recall, was hired by the Department of Homeland Security in 2022 to head its short-lived Disinformation Governance Board. The dystopian nature of that agency's title caused widespread public criticism, followed by hasty reassurances from the feds that the board would have no authority to actually police speech. Nevertheless, Jankowicz became the subject of considerable scrutiny, and not just because of her singing prowess.
Pondering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie when Rudy Giuliani shared that intel from Ukraine.
Just who is this sing-song academic entrusted by the federal government to distinguish truth from lies? A close look at her record gives plenty of reason for concern, Hunter Biden's laptop being the quintessential example of the counter-disinformation industry misidentifying a true story as false. Dozens of former national security officers and experts wrongly flagged the New York Post Hunter Biden scoop as appearing to possess malicious Russian origins. The mainstream media, led by Politico, then intensified the error, asserting the incorrect claim that the national security experts had definitively judged the laptop story to be disinformation rather than simply resembling disinformation. And Jankowicz fell for it too, hook, line, and sinker. On October 22, 2020, then President Trump and challenger Joe Biden engaged in a presidential debate. When Biden was asked about the laptop story, he responded that it had no legitimacy. It had been deemed false by national security experts. Again, this is not what the national security experts actually said. Now, in any case, when Jankowicz tweeted about the exchange, she failed to make any note of this difference, and this is not surprising since she repeatedly circulated news stories that emphasized the potential Russian origins of the laptop story, which in her mind cast, quote, yet more doubt on the provenance of the New York Post Hunter Biden story. And for good measure, she called the idea of the laptop actually having been recovered from a repair shop as a, quote, fairy tale. It is now 4 years later, and no one has ever presented a shred of evidence that the repair shop aspect of the story was fake. On the contrary, we know that the repair shop owner is real because Hunter Biden has sued him for leaking the contents of the laptop. So it may sound like I'm harping on this one issue, but the Hunter Biden laptop story is the reason why so many people on the right and some on the left have grave reservations about the rise of anti-disinformation watchdog groups. Not only were so many so-called experts dead wrong about the Russian connection, they pursued all the wrong policies as a result. Vast efforts to pressure social media platforms to censor questionable content were what followed. Crackdowns by the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and other law enforcement agencies on election-related information paved the way for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, to crack down on coronavirus-related misinformation during the pandemic. Now, this isn't an insignificant or trivial issue that Jankowicz just happened to get wrong. It was emblematic of an entire approach to dealing with disputed facts, an approach pioneered by academics working in tandem with government agencies and directed at speech on social media. Incredibly, the researchers who worked hand in hand with the federal government to achieve this result, widespread censorship, are now complaining that they are the ones being silenced. Disinformation tracking organizations now routinely complain that social media platforms have stopped taking their calls. Moreover, they face increased scrutiny from congressional Republicans who have started probing the extent to which said research is funded by the U.S. taxpayers, i.e. you and me. And so Jankowicz has reemerged as director of another new disinformation watchdog group, the American Sunlight Project. Its first action was to send a letter to congressional Republicans objecting to their efforts to thwart research into disinformation. Quote, your committees are using government resources to attack these researchers, deliberately misconstruing their work, says the letter. I, for one, would not be surprised whatsoever if a partisan figure had misrepresented matters in order to score a political point, to be clear. But the letter does not provide a single example of anti-misinformation research being misconstrued. It does, however, claim that, quote, the vast majority of the researchers criticized by Republicans are women and that they have faced gendered, sexualized, violent rhetoric as a result. Now, while the letter contains 10 footnotes, not a single one of them attempts to quantify the claim that female researchers are being criticized disproportionately. Now, on X, Nina Jankowicz responded to me, calling out her new organization, to my active writing about this. She said she would be happy to provide evidence for her assertion that the vast majority of scrutinized researchers are women after House Republicans first meet her demands. She also criticized my insinuation that fighting disinformation results in censorship. She tweeted in response to me, "If fighting disinformation is censorship, how is society meant to manage thousands of authentic-looking AI-built and targeted deepfake videos of authority figures saying different things in the midst of a global crisis?" Talk about a straw man? I think we can absolutely fight AI-built deepfakes without defaulting to knee-jerk censorship of contrarian content, obviously. The American Sunlight Project, by the way, takes its name from the old adage that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Jankowicz has called on Republican chairmen of the House Oversight Committees to release full rather than partial transcripts of their interviews with disinformation researchers. And that's a laudable goal. I agree with it. The American people should have full access to these conversations, not snippets released by partisans on either side of the debate. But it's the anti-disinformation crowd that has consistently been on the side of restricting the American people's access to information, out of fear that that information might not be entirely correct and could lead you to reach some wrong conclusion, some conclusion they don't agree with. Oh, and by the way, the New York Times noted that Jankowicz declined to release the names of the American Sunlight Project's donors. So not so much sunlight in that direction.
Yeah, I saw Jankowicz getting, I think, rightly criticized on the internet. Glenn Greenwald had a good take, I think, where he was pointing out how amazing it is that after all of this time, these people haven't seemed to have introspected at all about why it is that their efforts got such harsh pushback. I mean, there's a world, the desire for there to be some kind of pushback, clarification of things that are genuinely false. I mean, I think we all appreciate how the community comments function on Twitter helps to clarify facts that are buzzing around in a social media world that can often travel a mile before the truth comes out, right? The mistruths, lies, inaccurate facts can circulate very quickly, and I think that's a legitimate thing to be concerned about. But the way that these people go about it is to presume that they are uniquely able to understand the truth, and that it is very ideologically mediated. And that is something that they're still struggling with. And they are continuing, I think, to struggle with that and realizing why they're getting the pushback, because they simply cannot see past their own ideological blinders.
That's very well said. Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And their efforts have been, they've been government funded. They've been publicly funded to some degrees. We've seen, based on the good work that so many independent journalists have done, how much of they're academic groups, they're nonprofits, they work closely with the State Department and DHS and other organizations. And so it is fair for the American people and their representatives to have questions about it. And I agree with her that partial releasing of transcripts from Republicans' investigations into this matter are not helpful, and they should just release all the transcripts so we can just let the people know. I'm totally open to the idea that they're being misinterpreted as well sometimes. That's fine. I'm not saying that's impossible at all. But I did find, again, she made an assertion about who was coming under attack, and she has citations for all the other things in that letter. I'm like, well, that thing doesn't have a citation. And she says, well, I'll tell you where that citation is after I get what I want. Well, then you're not especially different than any other political actor in this fray, and we just wish you would be transparent about that.
I think that's right. Well, thank you for that, Robby. That was a very edifying radar. Stick around. We've got a lot more great rising coming up next.